Hello and welcome back to part 2 of the Teltale Lilac Bush stories, the best of. Here I am to tell more scary stories of the Teltale Lilac Bush, and we are at the tragedy at the spring right here. Hope you all watched the first part of the best of the Teltale Lilac Bush, and hope you're terrified. Well, guess what? Here is more of the story, and it is right here. Starting off, the tragedy at the spring. Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart. Just kidding, I wish. Well, this is another Sam Walton right here, which I'm going to talk to you about. Sam Walton was a brutally, insanely jealous man. His wife, Emily, was a timid, frail woman, the bride of the 3 summers, whose time was spent throughout in the mines and making of a happy home of her moody, ungrateful husband. Their log cabin home was an isolated hollow a mile from the nearest road where the neighboring farmers hauled their grain and produced a village about 4 miles away. Sam knew Emily was pure and faithful, but it served his purpose to accuse her of being too friendly with the son of their nearest neighbor, who occasionally came over to help with the plowing and spring seeding. It helped to provide a smokescreen of an affair with the young German girl, the adopted daughter of Henry Schneider, who lived about a quarter of a mile of the hollow. Sam often went in town late in the afternoon and came home after dark so that he might be in the flaxen-haired Hilda. On the evening, Emily delayed milking later than usual and went sent to the barnyard. She found that one of her 3 cows had come along with the others. She milked the 2 cows and then started out through the pasture toward the west gate next to the woods. She did not call, for she had found that late in the evening the cows would often start feeding in order to still their bells and kept from being found. As it was so, Emily, walking on the thick grass, was close upon the guilty lovers before they were aware of her approach. They could not do nothing but to crouch in the shadows waiting. Just then, when a cowbell tinked and Emily turned out to the path down the hill where Brindle stood quietly chewed her cud. She drove the cow to the milking lot, unaware of the fright she had given the guilty couple. Finally, Hilda broke the silence. "Do you think she saw us?" "I don't know. We can never be sure, damn it," Sam said. "There was only one thing to be sure. You run home and keep mum, and I'll do the rest." Taking a roundabout way, Sam reached the spring beyond the house. He knew Emily went for water to wash the dishes in her milk palace. "This will be her last trip for water," he said. She brought it all to herself by her cursed snooping around. Hidden by branches in the dark, he waited. A flood of light from the opened door told him that his wife started to the spring. He crouched in the spruce thicket that surrounded the spring. A sudden breeze moved to the branches slightly, and slightly like the departing spirit, caused his flesh to be creeped and the blood to chill. Now he could hear Emily's footsteps and her slight form emerge from the shadows. As he knelt to the dip of water, he grabbed her hair and a sharp blade slashed across her throat. A sharp wailing cry pierced the silence of the night, but only once from the murderer pressed her head into the spring, stifling all but grumbling sound which could soon stop. Breathlessly, Sam Walton gazed upon the still body of his dead wife. He knew his job was not finished. He must hide the body and hid it well. Below the spring was a large pond fed by the spring. He flew blows with the mattock and the pond drained, and then 10 minutes of work with the spade excavated a shallow grave. It took a moment to place the slight body in the watery tomb and cover it with the cold mud. In a short time, the breaking of the wall was mended. By morning, thought Sam, the pond will be full again. It'll be safe. 2 days later, he reported the disappearance of his wife. He said that he had threatened to leave him, and one night he came home and she was gone. Just a little domestic trouble, folks, through. Everything will turn out all right. But things did not go well with Sam. he went about his work as usual. He could not sleep. Often he heard queer sounds coming from the kitchen early in the morning. Sounds like those Emily made preparing breakfast. At the evening, milking the cow seems restless and would sometimes stample from the milking lot for many days. Walton would not go near the spring, although he had removed all traces of blood and then cleaned the spring thoroughly and limited it to the pure water. However, as weeks passed, he felt more at ease and started going to the spring again. It was much better water than that he had been getting from the old wet weather spring under the willow tree in the garden. One night he went to the water later than usual. The night was cloudy and there was no moon. Sam fell ill as ease. The wind played upon the spruce branches, reminding him of the late exhalation of breath as the soul flies from the body. Then there was a soul-rending scream. Sam gave a hoarse cry and fled. He never knew when he passed the house. He only knew he had fled in mortal fear. The next summer, for the first time, the spring went dry. The pond, of course, dried up too. Early in the fall, a neighbor boy was passing through the farm. His dog began digging in the spot of mud at the bottom of the pond. The boy noticed a piece of cloth and tugged on it. When it would not come loose, he took a sharp stick and would short time found that the cloth on the human body he reported to find, and the body was dug up. The mysterious disappearance of Emily Walton was solved. Sam Walton was later found, and he made a full confession of the murderer. At his trial, he was judged insane and was committed for the mental institution where he spent the remainder of his life. Afterwards, no one lived on the farm. Weird noises were heard in the vicinity of the spring. The moaning of the wind in the spruce boughs sounded like a plaintive lament. Between 8 and 9 any summer evening, a strange gurgling could be heard. Then a shrieking cry would pierce the silence, and the birds, frightened, would scud off in the night. Neighbors say that every year on the anniversary of the killing, the crystal spring water changed the color of blood. Wow, that's a scary story of a haunted farm with a insanely jealous person. Alrighty then, another story, moving on to the ghostly children, which will be on part 3. This one is called The Blue Boy Hotel. This story is said to have happened between the years of 1870 and 1895 on the main street of Shinston. The setting was a 2-story hotel called the Blue Boy Hotel, which had been a saloon in front of the pool room in the basement. Behind the hotel there was a huge barn where all the livestock was kept. Bill and Melvin Everett was the owners. These men would take in many guests during the year, most of whom which were rich and well-to-do. If they had large sums of money, Melvin knew it, because it was a house ruled of the people who tell him how much money they had. He would get into them in poker games, playing with a large sum of his own money, so that guests would keep playing. He often arranged to have a man or group of men came in to hold up in the game. He would never be suspected because he played with a large amount of his own money. Bill would court the woman that he had stayed at the hotel. If they were rich, he would unusually marry them. Then, after a couple of weeks, he would kill them and his new wife and bury her under the barn, seeing that he had left them. The 2 brothers also rested cattle and then hid them at the farm at Adamsville until the brands were changed. Bill would then sell them to the cattle buyers for every reasonable price. But after each sale, he would try to kill the buyer, take the cattle, and sell them again. After a life of swindling, cheating, wrestling, and the murder, Bill died around 1890. Every night after Bill's death, Melvin would dream about the money Bill had in the dream. Bill was hiding his money, but Melvin never found out where. One night, as Melvin was getting ready to go to bed, his brother Ghost appeared. Bill told him to go to the old abandoned Lucky Lady mine and then disappeared. Melvin ran to the mine and got the money packs. Before he could reach the entrance again, he was covered by the slate fall. The money found beside Melvin's body inside the packs was a note signed by Bill, saying that if anything should happen to Melvin, the money was to go to Melvin's wife. Not wondering the hotel was unable to sell it, Mrs. Everett had to tear it down. When the barn was torn down, the bodies and skeletons of the murdered people were found. When he heard that he had been discovered under the barn, Zella Driscoll of Bluefield, whose danger had disappeared while she was in Shinston, came down believing that his daughter had been killed by the brothers. He went to see Mrs. Everett and courted her as a new form of revenge. He took her one night, shot her, and threw her body in the West Fork River. Every night thereafter, Mrs. Everett would appear to Mr. Driscoll. He had been walking to the garden, moving on to the house, and going down to the street. One rainy night, he decided to walk down to the river. Reaching the river, he began to cry from shame. The ghost of Mrs. Everett was always with them, walking alongside him. He jumped into the West Fork and drowned himself. The bodies of Mrs. Everett and Mr. Driscoll were found in the next morning by the riverbank, where Mr. Driscoll had jumped in. The ground was wet and Mr. Driscoll's footprints were clearly seen down to the riverbank. And alongside with his footprints were a set of women's footprints sent like those who had been made only by the shoes of Mrs. Everett was wearing. Wow. So anyway, the Blue Boy Hotel was basically, whoever stayed there was either murdered, decapitated, or so what. That was the story. Well, those are the two stories about the jealousy rival of Sam Walton and the Blue Boy Hotel. And then the next part that I'm going to do is ghostly children, which is very, very scary. And let me warn you, you'll be terrified once you hear those stories.